I find myself in a complicated and emotionally charged situation as my wedding day gets closer. My fiancé and I are deeply in love, and we've built a strong relationship over the past 5.5 years. However, we're currently facing our first significant disagreement, which centers around the issue of my last name after marriage. I'm torn between keeping my identity and respecting his wishes, and it's causing a rift that I'm unsure how to navigate. Several months ago, my fiancé and I had a serious discussion about what would happen with my last name once we got married. He expressed a strong desire for me to take his last name, citing the importance of tradition. To him, it's a way to show unity and togetherness as we start our new life as a married couple. He feels that having the same last name would symbolize our bond and make us feel more like a unified family. I completely understand where he's coming from. He was raised in a family where traditional values were very important, and I know this is his way of honoring that. On the other hand, I've always known that I don't want to change my last name. It's something I felt strongly about my entire life. My last name is more than just a name to me. It carries my family's history and heritage. It represents who I am and where I come from. Over the years, I've worked hard to understand and accept myself, and my last name feels like an essential part of my identity. Changing it feels like I would be giving up a piece of myself, and that's not something I'm comfortable with. Given our differing views, we tried to find a middle ground. We decided that I would hyphenate my last name with his, so we could both keep our individual identities while still having a shared family name. This seemed like a reasonable compromise at the time. However, he made it clear that he wouldn't be changing his last name or hyphenating it. He feels that it would be socially awkward and deviate from traditional norms, and he's always been someone who cares about fitting in and maintaining appearances. He mentioned that if it weren't for the social implications, he might consider changing his name too, but he doesn't want to deviate from what is traditionally expected of a man in his position. As our wedding date approaches, I'm feeling increasingly uneasy about this decision. Deep down, I still wish I could keep my last name exactly as it is, without adding his to it. I'm currently in medical school, working hard to become a doctor, and one of my dreams has always been to be addressed as doctor, followed by my last name. My last name is unique and distinctive, and in a profession where standing out can be beneficial, I feel it gives me a sense of individuality and pride. In contrast, my fiancé's last name is very common, and I worry that taking it on, even in a hyphenated form, would cause me to lose a part of my professional identity that I value greatly. I know that technically, if I hyphenate, I can still be called by my original last name. However, the idea of combining it with his feels like a concession I'm not ready to make. It feels like I'm giving up something important to me, something I've held on to for so long. I'm struggling with the thought that I might regret this decision down the line, and that I'll end up feeling resentful about having compromised on something so personal and meaningful. Adding to my internal conflict, I realize that many people might judge my fiancé harshly based on this issue alone, but that wouldn't be a fair assessment of him. He's a wonderful person who has made numerous sacrifices and compromises for me throughout our relationship. For instance, my medical school schedule is incredibly demanding, and he has been nothing but supportive and understanding. We currently live in different cities because of my schooling, and he makes the effort to drive down nearly every weekend to spend time with me. He's also agreed to move wherever I match for residency, which is a significant commitment, considering he has a stable job that he enjoys. Moreover, he didn't have a strong preference for a big wedding, but he's going along with my desire for one because he wants me to be happy. He's planning to move in with me after the wedding, even though it might be more advantageous for him professionally to stay in his current location. Despite not being religious himself, he has always respected my religious beliefs and traditions, participating in practices and celebrations that are meaningful to me. He's consistently been a pillar of support for my career ambitions and has shown nothing but kindness and patience as I pursue my dreams. Our relationship has been wonderful, and this is really the first time we've encountered a fundamental difference in our views. That's part of what makes the situation so confusing and difficult for me. I've always envisioned myself keeping my last name, and I've been clear about this throughout our relationship. But at the same time, I love him deeply and don't want to cause him pain or make him feel like I'm rejecting his wishes or family traditions. I'm stuck between wanting to honor my own identity and respecting the person I love. It's a painful decision because I don't want to end up feeling like I've lost a part of myself, but I also don't want to hurt him or cause a rift between us. I'm left wondering if I should just go along with the compromise we've made, even though I'm not fully at peace with it, and risk feeling unhappy with this decision in the future. I'm torn between following my heart and making a sacrifice for the sake of our relationship, and I don't know what the right answer is. Recently, my fiancé and I had a deep and somewhat tense conversation about the prospect of hyphenating my last name once we're married. During this discussion, we also talked about what our future children's last names would be if we decide to have any. I expressed that I was completely fine with our children taking his last name. However, the topic of my own last name became a bit more complicated. He seemed very insistent that he wanted me to take his last name and was not open to hyphenating his own name alongside mine. I'm not entirely sure why he feels so strongly about this. While he mentioned social norms and tradition quite a bit during our conversation, I sensed there might be more to it than just conforming to societal expectations. At one point, he appeared visibly sad and a little hurt when I brought up the idea of us not sharing the same last name. I believe his reaction stems from his desire for us to appear as a single, united family under one name, which he views as an important symbol of our marriage and commitment to each other. The last few times we discussed this topic, things got pretty heated. I think it's because we both have strong feelings and beliefs about the importance of names and what they signify. Despite this, I realize that we need to have an open and honest discussion to understand if this issue could be a deal breaker for either of us. However, I do know that this isn't a deal breaker for him. He has mentioned before that he would still want to marry me even if I decided to hyphenate my last name instead of taking his outright. When I first agreed to hyphenate my last name, I did it primarily to make him happy because I felt bad about disappointing him. At the time, I wanted to show that I was willing to compromise and meet him halfway. But deep down, I knew that I would prefer to keep my own last name. If I were to firmly stand by my decision to keep my name, I believe he would eventually accept it and try to move past his disappointment. Still, I can't help but feel guilty for making him feel this way, and I'm uncertain if he might hold any resentment towards me for not using his last name legally. On a social level, I'm completely comfortable with people referring to me by his last name in casual situations or around family. However, I have a strong preference for keeping my maiden name legally. I brought up this idea as a compromise about 4 or 5 months ago, thinking it might be a middle ground that could satisfy both of us. However, he didn't seem to think that this approach would solve anything. From what I can gather, he wants us both to legally share one family name as a definitive, official statement of our union, not just a social one. As our wedding day draws closer, and with our honeymoon immediately following, he's been under a lot of stress from all the planning, particularly with managing expectations and responsibilities with his family. I worry that if I bring up my concerns about the last name issue now, it might add to the stress and potentially affect our enjoyment of this significant and joyful time. I'm really torn about whether to address this before the wedding or to wait until everything has settled down afterward. In considering my options, I've received some advice from others. One piece of advice suggested that if I'm in medical school or planning to become a doctor, it might be best to either change my name before starting my residency or not change it at all due to the considerable administrative hassle involved. They mentioned that it's becoming more common for women to keep their maiden names, especially if they have already established a professional identity with that name. Another person advised me not to make a compromise that I would be unhappy with, especially since it wouldn't be fair for me to make all the sacrifices while he gets what he wants without any trade-off. Given all this, I made the decision to bring up my concerns with my fiancé 2 weeks ago. I thought it would be better to address the issue before the wedding rather than letting it fester and possibly become a larger issue later on. We were sitting on the couch, and I just blurted out that I was still struggling with the idea of hyphenating my last name, and that I really wanted to keep my maiden name as it is. For what felt like an agonizingly long moment, he just looked at me, and I could see the hurt and disappointment in his eyes. The silence that followed was deafening, and it only made me more nervous about how he would react. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally spoke. He told me that he understood where I was coming from, but he reiterated that having the same last name was very important to him. He said that he had been thinking about this a lot too, and felt like we were at a serious impasse. He asked if I was willing to compromise in any other way, but I was at a loss for how we could find a solution that would make both of us happy. The days that followed were filled with tension. We tried to go about our daily routines, but there was this underlying strain between us that neither of us could ignore. I could tell that he was upset, and I felt a deep sense of guilt for bringing this up so close to the wedding. At the same time, I knew I couldn't go through with something that didn't feel right to me, even if it meant causing temporary discomfort. One evening, our frustrations boiled over into a particularly heated argument. He accused me of not caring enough about our future together, and even suggested that if I couldn't make this one compromise, maybe we weren't meant to be together. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I started to question everything. Was I being selfish? Was I putting my own desires above the health and happiness of our relationship? But then, I took a step back and remembered all the sacrifices I had made for him in the past. I realized that this wasn't just about a name change. It was about my identity, my sense of self, and what I was willing to compromise on. In the middle of all this turmoil, I received a call from my mom. She could immediately tell that something was wrong, just from the tone of my voice. We talked for a while, and she listened as I poured out my concerns and frustrations. She reminded me that it's important to stay true to myself, and to not make decisions based on guilt or pressure. Her words were a comforting reminder that I need to honor my own feelings and boundaries, even in the face of difficult decisions and conversations. When she saw that I was upset, she gently asked me what was going on. I tried to hold back my emotions, but I couldn't. All the frustration, confusion, and fear that I had been bottling up came pouring out. I told her everything. How my fiancé and I were in a standoff about whether I should change my last name after we got married. It felt like such a trivial thing on the surface, but it was causing so much tension between us. I explained how I felt caught between honoring a tradition that was important to him and staying true to my own sense of identity. As I spoke, she listened without interrupting, her eyes fixed on me with a calm understanding. She didn't try to offer solutions or downplay what I was going through. Instead, she let me vent, giving me the space to voice all my concerns and fears. When I finally stopped talking, she paused for a moment, thinking carefully about what she wanted to say. Then, with a wisdom that I deeply appreciated, she said, "You have to be true to yourself. If you compromise on something that is so important to you, you'll end up resenting him, and that's not fair to either of you." Her words struck a chord with me. I realized that I had been so worried about making the right choice for him and for our future together that I hadn't fully considered what was right for me. She reminded me that my feelings and values were just as important as his, and that a relationship should be about finding a balance that respects both partners. That conversation gave me the strength I needed to have a difficult but honest talk with my fiancé. I remember sitting him down and telling him that I loved him more than anything in the world. My voice trembled slightly as I confessed that I couldn't go through with changing my last name. I tried to explain that my name wasn't just a string of letters or a label. It was a part of my identity, a link to my past, my family, and my dreams for the future. It wasn't about defying tradition or ignoring his feelings. It was about staying true to who I was. I suggested that we could find another way to express our unity as a couple, maybe through a shared middle name or a new family tradition. But I made it clear that giving up my name wasn't something I could do. As I spoke, I could see a range of emotions playing across his face: confusion, hurt, frustration. He didn't say anything for a long time, and I could tell he was processing everything I had just said. The silence felt heavy, and I wondered if I had pushed him too far, if I had jeopardized our relationship by standing my ground. Finally, he took a deep breath and told me that he needed some time to think. He said he wasn't sure how he felt and needed to sort through his emotions. He packed a bag and decided to stay with a friend for a few days. As he left, I felt a pang of fear and uncertainty. The next few days were some of the longest and hardest of my life. I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation, replaying it over and over in my mind. I kept wondering if I had made a mistake, if there was something else I could have said or done to make him understand my perspective without causing so much pain. While he was gone, I did a lot of soul searching. I thought about all the moments that had brought us together, the laughter, the adventures, the quiet nights where we just hold each other. I also thought about the challenges we had faced, the arguments we had resolved, the times we had supported each other through tough situations. I realized that this situation, as painful as it was just another challenge for us to face together. If we could get through this, it would prove that our relationship was strong enough to withstand anything. But I also knew deep down that I couldn't back down on something that was so integral to my sense of self. When he finally came back, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept much and had spent a lot of time thinking. He sat me down and said that he had thought a lot about what I had said. He admitted that he still felt strongly about sharing a family name, that it was important to him because it represented a connection to his family and their traditions. But he also said that he understood now that asking me to change my name was asking me to give up something that was just as important to me. Then he suggested something that completely took me by surprise. He proposed that we both hyphenate our last names as a way to show our unity and respect each other's identities. He explained that this way, we would both be making a change, a gesture that symbolizes our partnership and commitment, while still honoring each other's backgrounds and the names we were given at birth. I was stunned by his suggestion. I hadn't expected him to come up with such a thoughtful compromise. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, realizing that he was willing to meet me halfway. We talked about it some more, going over the pros and cons, and decided that this was the best solution for us. It wasn't the traditional path that most people take, but it felt right for us. It reflected who we were as individuals and as a couple. When we shared our decision with his family, their reaction was mixed. They were initially surprised and didn't quite understand why we felt the need to do things differently. I could see the confusion and concern in their faces, especially since they were so accustomed to the tradition of the wife taking the husband's name. But over time, they began to see that this was important to us, and they gradually came around to the idea. My family, on the other hand, was supportive from the very beginning. They understood why I wanted to keep my name, and were happy that we had found a solution that worked for both of us. Our wedding went smoothly, and our honeymoon was everything we had hoped it would be. We both felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that we had successfully navigated a difficult challenge together. Looking back, I realized that this experience had brought us closer. It forced us to communicate openly, to listen to each other, and to understand each other's perspectives in a way that we hadn't before. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. We learned that our relationship is strong enough to withstand even the toughest challenges, as long as we are willing to be honest, patient, and respectful of each other's needs. For some context, my fiancé comes from a very traditional family. His parents have been married for over 30 years, and they both took great pride in sharing the same family name. I think a lot of his initial resistance to my keeping my name came from a desire to honor that tradition and to uphold the values that his family had instilled in him. On the other hand, my family has always been more progressive. My parents raised me to be independent, to think for myself, and to value my own identity. They taught me that it's important to stay true to who you are, even if that means going against the grain or challenging societal expectations. I think that's why this issue was so important to me. In the end, we found a way to honor both of our backgrounds while staying true to ourselves. It wasn't easy, but it was a journey worth taking.